Have you ever felt a profound longing for a relationship with God that goes beyond the surface? A prayer that doesn't just skim the water, but reaches down into the very core of your existence. For centuries, the devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel has served as a beacon, guiding millions of souls through the winding paths of the interior life. This ancient tradition invites us to do exactly that, to let Mary, the Queen and Mother of Carmel, lead us into the deepest waters of prayer and divine love. During these 9 days of this sacred novena, as we prepare to celebrate her feast on July 16th, we place our hands in hers. We ask her to teach us the very same path she walked, a path marked by silence, by contemplation, and by a total surrender to the will of the Almighty. Day 1. Mary, Queen and Mother of Carmel, the opening of the Novena. We begin by entrusting our entire lives to the Mother who has accompanied sincere seekers of God for centuries. Since the earliest days of Israel's history, Mount Carmel has been revered as a sacred place, a threshold where heaven and earth seem to touch in a special way. It was on that rugged mountain that the prophet Elijah, the foundational figure of all Carmelite spirituality, looked out and saw a tiny cloud. That small cloud announced the coming of life-saving rain after years of bitter drought. Christian tradition has always seen this cloud as a prefiguration of Mary, the one who would bring the rain of divine grace into our world in the person of Jesus Christ. That tiny cloud over Carmel was the first sign in history that God was preparing something completely new for his people. The devotion to Mary under the title of Our Lady of Mount Carmel was not born from a mere passing sentiment. No, it grows from a deep spiritual lineage that roots itself in the heart of the Old Testament and flowers fully in the life of the medieval and modern church. In the 12th century, the first hermits settled on Mount Carmel. Inspired by the fiery example of Elijah and a deep love for the Virgin Mary, they built a humble chapel in her honor, recognizing her as the patroness and the mother of their contemplative community. Since that moment, Carmel and Mary have been inseparable. As we begin this novena, the Church invites us to realize a beautiful truth. It is not simply we who are seeking Mary, it is she who is seeking us first. Mary's spiritual motherhood is not passive, it is not distant, it is active, it is solicitous, and it is deeply personal. Just like any mother who cannot stop worrying about her children, she has been waiting for you. By starting these 9 days of preparation, you are responding to an invitation that preceded your own choice, to a love that has always been there, waiting for your yes. Carmelite spirituality teaches us that a truly authentic Christian life is not just about checking off religious obligations. It is a journey of interior transformation that leads to a mystical union with God. This is the path that the great Carmelite doctors, like St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, described with a depth that still astounds the world today. And Mary is always the guide. She, who kept all these things and pondered them in her heart, is the first true contemplative of the Christian era. On this first day, let us renew our complete trust in the spiritual motherhood of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Bring to her now the intentions you carry in your heart, your spiritual struggles, your material needs. Ask her to walk beside you. Just as those first hermits built their chapel in her honor, let us make our interior life a sacred space dedicated entirely to her presence. Day 2, the faith of Mary and the prophet Elijah, the cloud of promise. The figure of the prophet Elijah and that small cloud over Carmel teach us a vital lesson. True faith knows how to wait for God's perfect timing. The story of Elijah on Mount Carmel is one of the most dramatic and symbolic episodes in the entire Bible. After his great victory over the prophets of Baal, and after years of a devastating drought that turned the land into a wasteland, Elijah climbed to the summit of Carmel. He bowed down to the earth with his face between his knees, and sent his servant to look toward the sea. 6 times the servant returned with nothing. "There is nothing there," he said. But Elijah did not waver. On the 7th time, the servant saw a small cloud, no larger than a man's hand, rising out of the horizon. And that tiny, humble cloud was the prelude to the abundant rain that saved the land from death. The church fathers and the Carmelite tradition saw in that little cloud a prophetic image of Mary. She was small in the eyes of the world, humble in her origin, yet she was the bearer of the water of grace that would save all of humanity. Just as that cloud Elijah saw brought life to a parched earth, Mary brought Christ to the world, the living water who quenches the deepest thirst of the human heart. Elijah's wait, repeated 7 times with a perseverance that refused to give in to discouragement, was a mirror of Israel's long wait for the promised Messiah. The faith this image presents to us is not an easy faith. It is not the faith of someone who only believes when everything goes as expected. It is the persevering faith of one who keeps looking toward the horizon, even when the servant returns empty-handed time and time again. This is the faith that defined Mary's entire life, a confidence in God that did not depend on outward signs, but on an interior certainty deeper than any physical evidence. When the world turned dark, when suffering seemed to have no explanation, Mary kept believing. She kept watching the horizon, just as Elijah did. In our own spiritual lives, we all experience seasons of spiritual aridity. We feel like the land before the rain, dry, cracked, and empty. There are moments when prayer feels sterile, when God seems silent, when the fervor we once felt has grown cold. Carmelite spirituality teaches us that these dry periods are not signs that God has abandoned us. Rather, they are necessary purifications. These are the times when God is working in us at a level much deeper than our feelings or emotions. On this 2nd day of our novena, let us present to Mary the dry places of our souls. Bring her the moments when prayer is a struggle, when your faith feels fragile, and when your love for God seems to have lost its flame. Let us humbly petition the Lord that he may grant us the unyielding faith of the prophet Elijah, a faith that refuses to surrender even when the horizon remains empty and barren, a faith that knows how to wait for that little cloud, the harbinger of the great rain of divine grace. Day 3, the Carmelite hope, waiting for God in the depths of silence. The spirituality of Carmel whispers a profound truth to our souls, that silence is not the absence of God, but rather the privileged sanctuary of his divine presence. One of the most defining hallmarks of Carmelite spirituality is its sacred valuation of silence, recognizing it as the indispensable condition for a deep and flourishing interior life. We live in a world that aggressively fills every waking moment with noise, with constant digital stimuli and a barrage of distractions that shatter our inner peace, making true recollection nearly impossible. In the face of this chaos, Carmel proposes a radical alternative. Silence is not a privation, it is plenitude, it is not a void, it is the very space where God speaks and where the soul finally learns to listen. This high regard for silence is no mere ascetic whim, nor is it a cold rejection of the world. It is a wise response to a profound spiritual hunger, a hunger that the constant roar of modern life systematically fails to satisfy. Our Blessed Mother, Mary, stands as the most perfect model of this silent stance before the Almighty. The Holy Gospel portrays her as one who kept all these things, pondering them in her heart. She lived in a state of active contemplation, which is not passivity, but the most intense form of spiritual attention. While others spoke, while others debated or became scattered by the events of the day, Mary remained silent, and because of her silence, she understood everything. This contemplative silence of Mary was not distance, it was proximity. It was not indifference. It was the deepest form of participation in the divine mystery unfolding before her very eyes. In the venerable Carmelite tradition, Christian hope is inextricably linked to this capacity to wait in the silence. To wait for God is not the passive stance of someone merely hoping for circumstances to change. It is the active posture of one who, in the quiet of prayer, keeps the heart wide open to the action of the Holy Spirit. It is the conviction that God is working, even when he cannot be felt, that his love is laboring in the deepest foundations of our soul, even when the surface appears stagnant or utterly arid. This is what St. John of the Cross called the dark hope, a hope forged in the fires of spiritual trial. This hope is infinitely more solid than any hope based on fleeting feelings or emotional consolations. Precisely because it rests on nothing but God himself, our contemporary world suffers from a growing incapacity for silence and for waiting. We are trapped in a culture of immediacy, demanding instant answers and visible results. This mindset is fundamentally opposed to the logic of grace, where the most vital transformations occur slowly in the hidden depths, often without the soul even being aware of the miracle taking place. Carmelite hope invites us to resist this logic of the instant and to trust in the rhythm of God, a rhythm that cannot be artificially accelerated but only welcomed with patience and unwavering fidelity. On this third day of our Novena, let us ask Our Lady of Mount Carmel to teach us the sacred art of silence and of waiting. May she help us to carve out spaces of recollection in our busy lives, places where God can truly find us. And may she grant us the patience of those who know that the most important things do not happen in the noise, but in the quiet, not in the agitation, but in the stillness of a heart that waits for God with the trust of a child. Day 4. The Scapula, a sign of belonging and maternal protection. The scapula of Mount Carmel is no amulet. It is the visible sign of a covenant of love and a total consecration to the Mother of God. This small brown habit, worn by millions of the faithful across the globe as a sign of their devotion, is one of the oldest and most cherished sacramentals in the Catholic tradition. Its origin is tied to the sacred tradition of the Virgin Mary appearing to St. Simon Stock, the prior general of the Carmelite order, in the year 1251. It was then that Mary reportedly entrusted the scapula to him, with a promise of special protection for all who wear it with faith and live according to its spirit. This tradition, venerated for centuries, expresses a spiritual truth that transcends the historical event itself. The scapula is, first and foremost, a sign of consecration. Whoever receives and wears it expresses, through a visible gesture, the desire to belong to Mary. It is a commitment to place oneself under her maternal mantle, to live according to the virtues she embodies: humility, purity of heart, a life of prayer, and the unceasing search for the face of God. Make no mistake, this is not a magic charm that guarantees salvation, regardless of how one lives. It is a sacred commitment that demands to be lived out. The exterior sign must correspond to an interior reality, a reality of surrender and trust in Mary's spiritual motherhood. To understand the scapula correctly, we must see it as a symbol of a relationship, not an object of power. Just as a wedding ring does not protect a marriage through its physical metal, but as a sign of a real love and a lived commitment, so too the scapula does not protect by magic. It protects as the visible expression of a filial love for Mary, a love that translates into an authentic Christian life. The promise of protection is the promise of a mother's love, a mother who never abandons her children, provided the soul remains open to her grace. The tradition of the scapula also invites us to reflect on the importance of visible signs in our spiritual journey. We are not pure spirits. We are embodied beings who need to express inner realities through material symbols. The scapula, like the sign of the cross, like holy water, like the sacred icons in our homes, does not replace the spiritual reality. It sustains and nourishes it. It serves as a constant reminder to the wearer of their bond with Mary and the path of holiness to which this relationship calls them. On this fourth day of our novena, let us meditate on the profound meaning of the scapula we wear, or that we desire to receive. Let us pray to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, asking her to help us live the commitment this sign represents with ultimate fidelity. May our exterior devotion always match the interior reality of genuine love, of constant prayer, and of a sincere search for God in every circumstance of our lives. Day 5. The humility of Mary, the masterpiece of the interior life. The humility of Mary is not weakness. It is the most luminous truth regarding the relationship between man and his Creator. Carmelite spirituality has always placed a singular emphasis on humility, recognizing it as the foundational virtue, the very bedrock of the interior life. Saint Teresa of Avila, a woman who plumbed the depths of the human heart with a precision that continues to astonish modern psychologists, would constantly remind her sisters that humility is the bedrock, the very foundation without which the entire edifice of the spiritual life inevitably crumbles into dust. This is not humility understood as self-loathing or the denial of the talents we have been given. No, it is humility as truth, the clear and serene recognition of who we truly are before the face of God, and who we are only because of His grace. Our Blessed Mother is the most exquisite model of this authentic humility. Her Magnificat, that soaring hymn of praise she offered before Elizabeth, is both the highest expression of her awareness of the great gifts she received and the most radical attribution of all merit to the Almighty. The Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is His name. Mary did not downplay the magnitude of what God had wrought within her, but neither did she claim a single shred of merit for herself. She recognized, with a crystal transparency, that everything was a gratuitous gift of the Father. This posture, which fuses deep gratitude with the constant awareness of its divine source, is the very definition of true Christian humility. In the spiritual path proposed by the Carmelite tradition, humility also takes on a very concrete, practical dimension. It is the willingness to let oneself be led by God without imposing our own rhythms or our own expectations on how He chooses to act within the soul. The great Carmelite contemplatives, especially the mystical doctor, St. John of the Cross, described with haunting accuracy the perils of spiritual pride, that subtle, dangerous tendency to claim ownership over the graces we receive, to measure our own progress by comparing ourselves to others, or to resist the paths of purification that God sets before us because they do not fit our preconceived ideas of how a spiritual life should look. The humility of Mary also teaches us that spiritual greatness is not something to be sought directly. Rather, it is the natural consequence of fidelity to small things. Mary did not aspire to be great. She aspired to be faithful to the will of God in the ordinary, hidden circumstances of her daily life. And it was precisely this fidelity in the little things that made her great. This lesson is eternally relevant for us today, as we are often tempted by the search for extraordinary spiritual experiences and run the risk of neglecting the sanctification of the ordinary, which is the very forge where the interior life is truly hammered into shape. On this fifth day of our novena, let us petition Our Lady of Mount Carmel to teach us her humility. Let us ask for that truth about ourselves that sets us free from pride without leading us to despair, that allows us to receive God's gifts with a grateful heart without trying to possess them, and that prepares us to be led by Him along the paths He chooses, even if they are not the paths we would have chosen for ourselves. Day 6. Mary, mistress of the interior life and the teacher of contemplative prayer. The Gospel of Luke describes Mary as treasuring all these things, pondering them in her heart. For the Carmelite tradition, this is not just a passing detail. It is one of the most critical texts in all of sacred scripture regarding the nature of contemplative prayer. This attitude of Mary is not passivity. It is the most intense form of attention and love. It perfectly describes what the Masters of Carmel have taught for centuries, that prayer is not so much speaking to God as it is letting ourselves be spoken to by Him. It is not about producing complex thoughts about God, but about remaining in His presence with a silent, attentive love. Saint Teresa of Avila, the great reformer of Carmel in the 16th century, who wrote with such clarity that the Church declared her a doctor, described mental prayer as nothing else than an intimate sharing between friends, taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us. This definition, which places the emphasis on a personal relationship rather than techniques or rigid methods, reflects the heart of Mary's meditation. It is not a religious exercise, but an encounter of love, not a mere practice, but a living relationship with a person who loves us and whom we love in return. The Carmelite tradition distinguishes between vocal prayer, meditation, and contemplation, not to create a rigid hierarchy, but to describe the natural deepening of the soul's communication with God. Vocal prayer, including the Rosary and the Liturgy of the Hours, is the starting point accessible to all. Meditation, the personal reflection on the truths of faith and the words of Scripture, deepens our understanding and stirs our affections. But contemplation, which is a pure gift from God that cannot be forced, is the highest form. It is where the soul simply rests in God, far beyond concepts, words, or images. For the vast majority of the faithful who do not live behind cloister walls, the call to the contemplative life does not mean abandoning the duties of family or profession. Instead, it means learning to live those duties with an awareness of God's presence that transforms them from within. This is exactly what Mary teaches us by her example. She lived the full weight of her responsibilities as a mother, a wife, and a woman of her time. And yet, in the middle of all those ordinary tasks, she maintained that contemplative heart, guarding everything and meditating upon it in the presence of the living God. On this 6th day, let us ask Our Lady of Mount Carmel to teach us how to pray with greater depth and authenticity. May she help us move beyond a prayer of mere words into a more personal and intimate union with God. May she teach us the art of remaining in the divine presence even amidst the noise and bustle of our daily lives. And may she intercede for us, that we may receive the gift of contemplation according to the measure God has ordained for each of us. Day 7. The fortitude of the Carmelite saints, Teresa, John of the Cross, and Thérèse of Lisieux. The great giants of Carmel show us that the path of the interior life is not a path exempt from trials, but one that transforms them. The history of Carmel is a history of heroic sanctity, producing some of the greatest mystics and doctors in the history of the Church. Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, and Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus are not just figures from the distant past. They are our companions on the journey, whose spiritual experiences, captured in their writings, remain an indispensable guide for anyone who seeks God with a sincere heart. And in all of them, in different but converging ways, the figure of Mary stands at the center as their model, their protector, and their mother. Saint Teresa of Avila, the great reformer of the Carmel of the 16th century, was a woman of such vibrant vitality and indomitable energy that she could have easily been lost in 1,000 worldly projects. Yet, divine grace intervened, directing that fire toward the complete reconstruction of the contemplative life. and toward the profound exploration of the soul's secret paths toward God. Her writings, especially the masterpiece The Interior Castle and The Way of Perfection, are not merely books. They are sacred maps of the spiritual territory that remains unsurpassed in their clarity and mystical depth even today. Teresa did not live the virtue of fortitude as some distant, abstract concept. No, she lived it as the concrete capacity to persevere in the good despite the crushing weight of interior trials, exterior misunderstandings, debilitating illnesses, and the fierce opposition she encountered throughout her entire life's mission. And then we gaze upon St. John of the Cross, the great mystical poet of Carmel, who described with a precision that is simultaneously austere and luminous the paths of interior purification that God utilizes to bring the soul into divine union. His imagery of the dark night of the soul, which has given a name to one of the most universal and yet least understood spiritual experiences, is not a description of psychological depression or divine abandonment. Rather, it is a process of profound purification, where God works within the soul in ways that the human mind simply cannot perceive with its ordinary faculties. The fortitude that John of the Cross proposes is the strength of the one who knows how to remain faithful in the darkness, trusting that the night is not the end, but the necessary bridge toward the dawn of eternity. We also find Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, the Little Flower, and the youngest of the Doctors of Carmel. In her brief life of only 24 years, she discovered what she called the Little Way, the path of spiritual childhood that leads to the heart of God, not through grandiose deeds or heroic feats of the flesh, but through a loving fidelity to the smallest of things. It is a path of filial trust that does not lean on one's own merits, but rests entirely on the infinite mercy of the Father. It is a love that transforms the most painful trials into offerings of priceless value. Her fortitude, which manifested with staggering power during the 18 months of spiritual and physical agony preceding her death, is perhaps the closest to our own lives. It is the silent heroism of every single day, the holiness found in the ordinary. On this 7th day of our novena, let us invoke the powerful intercession of these great Carmelite saints. Joining our voices with Our Lady of Mount Carmel, let us beg for the fortitude to persevere on the path of the interior life, despite the droughts and the storms we will inevitably face. May the examples of Teresa, John, and the little Therese remind us that the trials of the spiritual road are not obstacles, they are the road itself. And may Mary accompany us through them with the same steadfast presence with which she accompanied her Son to the foot of the cross. Day 8. Mary presents us to Jesus, preparing for the feast. As we enter the final stretch of this novena, Mary leads us toward the full encounter with Christ that the upcoming feast will celebrate. All authentic devotion to Mary, within the deep well of Catholic tradition and specifically within the Carmelite charism, has one single purpose: to lead the soul toward Christ. Mary is never a destination in herself. She is the safest, the surest, and the most direct path to her Son. The great masters of Carmel express this with crystalline clarity. Devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel is not an end. It is a privileged means that God has placed at our disposal to bring souls closer and more rapidly to union with Christ. The scapular, the novena, the great feast of July 16th, everything only has true meaning insofar as it draws us nearer to Jesus. This Christocentric orientation of Carmelite Marian devotion is expressed with sublime beauty in the symbol of the scapular. When Mary offers the scapular as a sign of protection and belonging, she is not offering it as a sign of a relationship that ends with her. No, she offers it as the habit of one who has chosen to follow the very path she walked toward Christ. To wear the scapular is to commit oneself to walking as Mary walked, in constant prayer, in radical humility, in the contemplation of the mysteries of God, and in total availability to the Father's will. It is a journey that Mary completed perfectly, and she invites us now to walk it with her as our guide and mother. The mystery of Carmel, when contemplated in its fullness, reveals one of the most beautiful truths of Marian theology, that Mary is not simply an object of our devotion, but an active subject in the history of salvation that continues to unfold. She was not only the mother of Christ in the past, she remains an active mother in the present, interceding, guiding, protecting, and leading her children toward that encounter with her Son, which is the goal of the entire Christian life. The Feast of Mount Carmel is the celebration of this active and vibrant maternity of Mary in the Church, and in every single soul that entrusts itself to her care. On this penultimate day, let us perform a serene examination of our relationship with Mary. Is our devotion truly bringing us closer to Christ? Does it translate into a deeper life of prayer, a greater fidelity to the gospel, and a more genuine love for others? Or has it remained on a merely external level of pious practices that do not touch the heart? Mary invites us to take a step further, to let her spiritual motherhood transform us from within, to entrust to her not just our petitions, but our entire lives, so that she may orient everything toward her Son. May this 8th day be a moment of renewal in our relationship with Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Let us ask her to take our hand and to lead us in these final days before her feast and in all the days to come, through the path of the interior life that leads straight into the heart of Christ, where we will find the peace that the world cannot give and the love that no creature can ever fully satisfy. Day 9. Consecration to the Scapula, renewing our belonging to Mary of Carmel. On this final day of the Novena, we renew, with profound gratitude and commitment, our consecration to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. We have reached the last day of this sacred journey, with our hearts fully prepared to celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel tomorrow. These 9 days of prayer and reflection have led us through the core pillars of Carmelite spirituality: the persevering faith of the prophet Elijah, the contemplative hope that waits for God in the silence, the love expressed through the scapula, the humility of Mary as the foundation of the interior life, the contemplative prayer she teaches us by her example, the fortitude of the Carmelite saints who have gone before us, and the Christocentric focus of all true Marian devotion, the consecration to the scapula, which so many of you listening have already received at some point in your lives, is not a gesture made once and then forgotten. It is a living covenant, a daily yes to the invitation of the Queen of Heaven. This is a relationship that craves to be renewed and breathed into life continuously. It is a living, spiritual flame that must be nourished by the bread of prayer and by the sincere, unwavering effort to live according to the very spirit that the brown scapula represents. Today, on this final day of our novena, we have reached a privileged moment, a sacred threshold where we must renew that initial commitment. We must tell Mary, from the deepest depths of our souls, that we desire to remain hers, that we choose to follow the path of the interior life she sets before us, and that we place our absolute trust in her spiritual motherhood for the days and years to come. This renewal is not a mere sentiment. It carries with it practical consequences, very concrete shifts that each of you can identify in your own unique circumstances. For some, this will mean rekindling a life of prayer that had perhaps grown cold or been neglected. For others, it will be the decisive moment to begin praying the Holy Rosary with greater regularity, or to draw closer with a thirsting heart to the holy sacraments. For others still, This is the divine invitation to commit themselves with fresh seriousness to the service of those in need, which is the concrete expression of the love that true devotion to Mary must generate. There is no single answer that fits everyone. Instead, there is a personal call from Mary to each soul, a whisper that can only be heard and answered in the sacred silence of one's own conscience. Let this novena not simply end with the 9th day, but let it be the dawning of a new stage in our relationship with Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and through her, with her divine Son, Jesus Christ. May the scapula we wear, or that we yearn to wear, become every day a more authentic sign of an interior reality, a reality of total surrender, of unceasing prayer, and of a restless search for God. May the great feast of July 16th, which we shall celebrate tomorrow, find our hearts prepared, wide open to receive the floodgates of grace that Mary desires to dispense upon those who trust in her maternal intercession. On this final day, let us give profound thanks to God for the gift of Mary as our mother on this narrow path of faith. Let us give thanks for the spiritual treasure of Carmel, which for centuries has guided countless souls toward union with the divine. And let us renew our confidence in the promise Mary has made to her children, that she will never abandon those who entrust themselves to her protection and who walk with fidelity along the path of the gospel that her Son has traced for us in his own blood. Prayer to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, O Virgin of Carmel, Queen and Mother of all who seek the face of God in the hidden journey of the interior life. As we conclude this novena of preparation for your feast, we stand before you with hearts full of gratitude and unbending trust. You, who from the heights of Mount Carmel have guided millions of souls for centuries toward your Son, Jesus, accept also our humble offering of these 9 days of preparation, Mother of Grace. Receive the renewal of our consecration to you. We desire to be yours, not only in the external gesture of wearing your scapula, but in the profound interior reality of a life oriented toward God according to the Spirit of Carmel. We commit to persevering prayer, to humility of heart, to the silence that listens, to the hope that never wavers in the face of hardship, and to the love that translates into concrete service to our brothers and sisters. Intercede for us before your Son, that he may grant us the gift of that deep interior life which Carmel proposes. May we learn to pray, not just with our lips, but with our very hearts. May we learn to seek God, not only in extraordinary moments, but in the most ordinary circumstances of our daily lives. And may we recognize his active presence, even in the spiritual aridity, even in the droughts and the trials that are an inevitable part of the spiritual journey. Protect all your children who wear your scapula as a sign of belonging to you. May this visible sign always correspond to an authentic interior reality. May it be a constant reminder of the consecration they have made and the path to which they have committed their lives. May your spiritual motherhood accompany them in every single moment, especially in the most difficult hours and at the supreme moment of their passing. Our Lady of Mount Carmel, lead us, as you have always done, toward your Son, Jesus, the source of all grace and all holiness. May the celebration of your feast tomorrow find our hearts completely open to the graces you wish to pour out, and may the path of Carmel, which we have begun to walk with you, lead us one day to the eternal contemplation of God in the kingdom of heaven. Amen.